There comes a time in every civilization's life cycle, usually around its exeunt, when the society shall face a legitimacy crisis. In a legitimacy crisis, it doesn't matter how vociferously the performers are performing and enacting their performance upon the people. The veneer starts to crumble away nevertheless. People start to realize on their own that the old tropes and revered structures will not work for them any longer. It is a volatile and dangerous time. But this phase is necessary if new world orders are to be established, and they cannot be established usually until there is a series of big disruptions to the old order. Because by definition, order tends to maintain things into a certain structure and into place. And only through critical disruptions can a new, more elegant order emerge among the people. I will now read the top couple sentence results from a Google search and AI response on July 21st to the term legitimacy crisis. A legitimacy crisis refers to a decline in public trust and acceptance of an institution, government, or system of authority. This can manifest as a loss of confidence in leadership, increasing social unrest, or a questioning of the system's ability to function effectively and fairly. It's got that AI tone to it. Anyway, I believe we are very much facing a legitimacy crisis in the United States where I live as we speak. But it's only kind of just begun in terms of unraveling. I also believe that legitimacy crises exist anytime a civilization is about to undergo collapse. And we have to understand that social order or a cultural order is one that is meant to define the world and to help the people thrive through that definition. And a legitimacy crisis is when an old order for how to interpret the world begins to critically fail and is undergoing decline or even death. When a belief system that previously framed and explained the world and made the world workable and interpretable through its framing, when that framing is no longer adequate and falls apart under emerging pressures. So today I want to invite us to consider how this phenomenon may fractally apply to an individual scale, a person having a legitimacy crisis of their belief system or belief system collapse, where we start to see the shadows themselves, see into the limitations of what our belief system is enabling us to feel and to see. This typically is precipitated when we encounter a phenomenon that our maps of the world don't quite work for. And the gap that results in the gap in between our ability to interpret and interact with the reality generates friction. That friction may ultimately lead to a quaking, a shaking, a trembling of the root belief system of that individual. In many cases, as individuals, our core belief systems are encoded into our very nervous systems in childhood. And sometimes people go through very, very minimal changes as they come of age and as they become adults that allows their belief systems to be questioned, whereas others of us go through great changes in regard to our belief systems and to our operational story of self. And this is what I'd like to explore today. Because who do you become when you no longer have a map for the world or for you that's working? What kinds of risks and opportunities does this kind of disorientation unlock? If we were to generalize the pattern of legitimacy crisis to all cognitive structures, meaning all cultures, belief systems, mythos, even psyche narratives, we would describe it as when an old order fails and a new order has not yet come through. First, we have to let the old order fail. This is the importance of something that elsewhere I've called apocalypse medicine, the often bitter, painful experience of having your cherished assumptions that constituted your identity stripped violently away through challenge. When the new order comes through, the entire world, and you in it, will look different. But this emerges. It cannot be forced to arise before it's ready. Until then, you're stuck in the mire, in the liminal, in the transformation that is unresolved. And if when that happens, parts of you retreat back into safety automatically, then you might never end up crossing the threshold of courage into new worldviews, new understandings that make living together, nurturing one another and the world and ourselves that much more effective and more easeful. When it comes to worldview challenges and transformations, this is something that I've learned to not just befriend, but to actually encourage and cultivate across my life. And I happen to have been in one big rethinking of things lately, and at multiple levels of my life at once. As a process, like I said, I've become profoundly intimate with transformation, with the evolution of worldviews. And it's central to my life, certainly, and has been my entire life, and it's central to the Fractal Praxis way. But that doesn't mean that there isn't still more that I must learn at my new levels of development. And so I've been through a pretty big insight process lately, the last month or so. Culminated in this experience last week where I recently tried to share my love for these transformation processes with a wonderful new connection that I had made. But my openness backfired into his retreat. And in those moments of relational precarity, it's a good idea to reflect on one's belief system and one's conduct, and the belief system and conduct of the other person involved, and to look at the divergences. It's a type of internal legitimacy questioning that can be really healthy, such as, is what I'm feeling legitimate? Is what I did and chose and said legitimate? Did I achieve my intention or fail in that interaction? Am I legitimate? Is my operational way of being okay? And is it getting me the results I want? This is healthy internal legitimacy questioning. And there's another level to testing the legitimacy of your belief, which involves testing it in reality against direct feedback. And we'll get to that in a moment. But first, I want to talk about the kind of superficial type of external legitimization that many people tend to seek. And that is the external legitimacy sought through others' validation or approval. This type of external validation might be something that we've engaged with our whole lives, but I have personally found this to be a trap. At a relatively young age, 13 to 14, I began encountering challenging new beliefs that resulted in me divesting from certain mainstream social standards, like Christian belief systems, like patriarchal and consumerist beauty standards, and like a belief in the supremacy and grandeur of the United States and its benevolent nature in the presence of the world stage. Up to ages 13, 14, those beliefs were intact or were at least unthreatened, but then they all became threatened and disrupted all at once during my coming of age. But because I wanted to diverge from these old belief orders, I began freeing myself from these belief systems, in part because it was just blanketly accepted that and expected that I ought to follow them. And that's what I was resisting. I was on my way to developing an autonomous belief system, to this methodology for arriving at my own conclusions, differentiating me necessarily then from the social fabric, so as to offer a cultural mutation that I believe is the seed of more beautiful societies to form. But this was no simple thing, for to the extent my fearful peers detected the presence of divergence in me, their own fear would be triggered, and the social rejection I invited into my body through embracing this method was considerable. But I was fighting a bigger beast, and something I will be sure to unpack in depth later, which is this choice of committing my life to integrating karma. I wanted to reduce and eliminate oppression. I personally felt and endured oppression as a woman growing up in the culture that I grew up in. I felt the oppressive nature and stymieing force of conforming to popular culture at the time, too. I felt the harms of injustice happening across the world as if they were blows on my own body, too. I joined with my peers at around the ages of 15 and 17 in the Amnesty International Club at my high school to write letters asking for the release of political prisoners, to let the world know we cared and were watching. We cared and we were watching, and to make meaning with my life. To make everything I felt and knew begin to matter and mean something to the rest of the world. This was my quest. And I wanted a world that involved cooperation and solidarity, one in which we stood up for each other, in which we cared for each other. And I wanted a world beyond the one I had entered into, which was profoundly avoidant of truth and deeply traumatized yet unconscious about it. I wanted to move beyond that, and I wanted to live in community of people who would live ethical and moral lives and seek to be in greater harmony with their true spirits, their selves, and their neighbors. So, like a little fractal, no matter how small or big my movements were, I just kept moving in that direction and developing my autonomy as a result. And in doing so, I also generated a great deal of legitimacy, but very much not in terms of existing social discourses and spheres, not in terms of standards or expectations in those domains, but rather, and this is important, between me and the world. Yes, I developed legitimacy for my worldview between me and the world. My belief systems have been radically sculpted through an interaction with the world in which true substantial feedback about generalized principles of existence could be felt by my system and could be learned through analysis. My belief systems have been legitimized by my successful interactions with my environment and my adaptability over time, my increasing ability to obtain what I want and to improve the definition of what I want so that it better supports the existence of all of my kin and the greater good. I developed an original method that I am looking forward to sharing with you here in Fractal Praxis for stress testing my belief systems. And I've deliberately, rigorously done so and remolded myself to fit the greater truth that I would find in those processes. In other words, I have undergone at least a dozen, I'd say, major legitimacy crises within my own life of my entire belief system. Massive upheavals and reorganizations in what I thought things meant, what meaning I assigned to things. Sometimes that has looked like a total spontaneous overhaul of viewpoint in a matter of moments, classically understood as a breakthrough or spiritual experience or peak experience. Other times, I have these cascading insights that grope at a new paradigm until I eventually arrive at it through continued effort, like layers of an onion, peeling back the root truth through progressive claims. And that's kind of what I've been experiencing lately. It was the beginning of this month, the Independence Day annual camping trip that I take, that I had what I thought was a major reorganizing insight about my life that kind of cohered and brought everything together. But then just a few days ago, I had an even more major insight on the same material, almost like a more mature interpretation of the same information. It incorporates the contents of the prior insight, but it does a better job of actually including and making sense of everything in my world and what my next steps are. Like a more elegant synthesis, but two different versions of the same material got interpreted at different times. And this is the incredible vulnerability of the method that I embrace, which is that I am, and my whole life path is radically subject to change depending on the meaning I'm making. And I'm making meaning very dynamically with what is here and what is sensed in my body, mind, and spirit, in the outer world as if it is in dialogue with me, and so on. Now, I believe our interpretations are always at least somewhat faulty, because our interpretations, our belief systems, are alive, and so they're fallible. However, I believe our reasoning and deducing of what is true or what is more true can improve over time. Our prescriptions and assumptions can improve if we train them. Occam's razor is one of the key training tools that I've used, and I'll be getting into Occam's razor and how I use it soon in these talks. But what's interesting about Occam's razor that I want to point out is that it deals in the likelihood of something to be true. It doesn't say something is more true, it says something is more probable, more likely to be true. And there's something deeply profound about that, to deal with the likelihood of something being true. And you can jump to the kind of quantum layer of interpretation here for sure, but I'll just lay it out for you. If we personally can't know for sure what is true about our worlds, but there's an enormous amount of information out there, quote unquote, that is evidence of the truth, that attests to reality, then what we can do is make better and better and better inner models of the outer world and become more and more adaptive to the truth of things. So what I carry today is a kind of medicine, both for the breaking into new world orders and for the total collapsing of old ones. this piece around apocalypse medicine. I offer a kind of intimacy with those processes and a kind of ministry and salve, not salvation, careful, to people who are undergoing apocalypses. When the logic and the meaning framework of the entire game that you have played with yourself up to this date grotesquely shifts, imagine like a skyscraper shifting atop a pillar of crumbling concrete, and you actually don't know if you've got minutes or hours to be able to get out of the building before it continues to crumble, right? The scenario of total mythos collapse that is, for many of us, perhaps happening at the collective scale is frightening and is a major crisis in reality for most of us. And I can't help but think about the latest news saga around the Jeffrey Epstein case, suggesting that perhaps the mythology or the kayfabe, there's a great article and great work being done about how the MAGA movement engages in kayfabe, which is a concept from the performative wrestling entertainment circuit. Anyway, the narrative power of the the kayfabe world view. Anyway, perhaps the latest news saga indicates that the mythology or kayfabe of the MAGA base is shook to the point of becoming quite fractured and on its way to further dissolution and defection. So we have to be cognizant of the fallout of collective mass scale disillusionment as well as personal disillusionment, being disabused of illusory stories about ourselves and our purpose in life and what things mean. This is a time of meaning to be upheaved and questioned. And it tends to be a volatile and unstable time. And the best course of action in this volatility is to engage, folks. We have a lot of sense making and meaning making to get to, and time is only running out on this quote unquote old order of things. So we've got to jump in now and engage in the meaning making and the sense making that has the power, if we apply it, to transform and to save via transformation our world. Everything we do shapes us, and we it. Legitimation of our belief system is important. We must test our belief system against reality and receive the feedback of the world in reality. Our beliefs should work for us. Our beliefs must make the world more workable. And the shedding of false belief systems will naturally stem from their being found faulty, from their not having sufficient explanatory power, from not being a sufficient position from which to act or perceive, from their failing under pressure, under load, right? And this process will bring about the need for developing more refined tools, that is, belief systems. If we think of our belief systems as like an appendage of our ability to make the world intelligible, it's like an extension, or like a technology, might be an extension of our ability. Belief systems are an extension of our ability, like an extra sense or a tool or an instrument. And this appendage, this extra sense, is subject to evolution, and it can be sculpted by intentional applied change making. It can be adapted and refined to be a more crafted, honed tool. And this path will lead us eventually to a place where great wisdom and love can and does proliferate amongst us through the culture. And there's an important distinction I want to highlight here, which is that we can't quite know the truth, but we can always get at it a little bit better, get closer to it. There's a distinction between the truth and what we make of it, between objective fact and intersubjective meaning making, between the existence of so-called ultimate or objective truth and the messy, flawed process of meaning making. Both things are very important. Truth is really important. Meaning making is also really important. And meaning making is the fleshy, messy, imperfect, raw, mistake prone domain of living beings, of the people, of all living organisms. Actually, it is a common process, a common reality and destiny, a collective process. So it belongs to the people, it belongs to the living. And truth, well, truth is something else. um, as I see this new meaning in my own life and what it is that needs to shift as a result, it always entails a decision. Sometimes these decisions can be very uncomfortable, but at minimum, it's a decision of where to put my attention and energy going forward, because I am now navigating from a different assignment of meaning in the world. I'm morphing and changing as a result of my interactions, and so are you. So let's get softer, looser clothing to ourselves going. Next week, we'll talk about methods for loosening up the mind. After all, the more rigid your mindset when the crisis becomes, the harder you'll crumble. Your process is untouchably legitimate. Your worldview is guaranteed flawed. When you do better at being, we all do better in kind. Disregard external judgments and instead seek feedback from life measured by close examination of your resulting sensations, feelings, and thoughts. And there's more to it, but that's a good place to start. With love from Fractal Praxis and blessings from C, the devotee.